This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions,
Yes.
Ooh, welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 279. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have a fun and fascinating little book reading, episode, I think, for everybody. In this political season, I guess at the end of this political season, right?
Yeah.
Where last week the glorious blue wave, descended upon this great nation of ours, and our orange dictator was rebuffed. CIA patriots are in control in Virginia, and so I think and democratic socialism is ascendant.
Exactly. We finally have Right, yeah. And didn't he go off to where do they go after they win the election? The New York mayors?
The cloning center. No.
Yeah, they go to some kind of foreign island or something, and they make all these deals.
Is it Puerto Rico has a conference? I forget. No, that was where Eric Adams, I think, hung out with Brock Pierce a couple years ago. But no. Yeah, I actually don't know. That's interesting. I want to know more about the secret
Puerto
Jekyll
Rico,
Island. Oh, really?
Yeah.
The New York
it's
politicians.
San Juan.
Stopped by Puertopia,
Yeah, it's something of a post-election day retreat for the state's political movers and shakers. Somos, I guess that's what it's called. It's like
Somos,
right? Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's like
we are. We are.
Well, no, it's not
Somos.
sumus. It's like SOMOS.
Yeah, in Spanish, that's we are.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, somos.
I was thinking Latin. Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah. Romance language. Yeah. Somos, Democrat. Democratias. I wonder what Democrat is in Spanish, actually. Now that I think about it. But anyways, we're going to talk about the American social, political, cultural and economic system today, but we're going to explore it from an interesting vantage point from this particular book, which I believe was published in 1991.
It's very interesting that a book like this, I guess, it's based on his experience of the U.S. in 1988. But it's very interesting, how recently this book was written, because it does kind of But let's explain what it is.
The author in question there is Wang Huning, who at the time was a young up and coming Chinese academic, basically a scholar, who was invited to I think in a kind of residency program to the U.S. for, I think it was about 6 months in the latter half of 1988 during the Bush v. Dukakis election season. And Wang got to travel around the United States, and I think he was based at UC Berkeley for a while, and then at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. But he got to drive via car, like through many different regions and see different parts of the country. And I guess when he returned to China, he published this book, America Against America, which, I think I think was well regarded when it was published, but actually fell out of print only to be revived and become an object of great interest. Particularly, one article said, after the 2021 January 6th insurrection, this book was put back into print and like became a bestseller in China. And I certainly I recall seeing its iconic cover maybe over the last like 5 years on Twitter from certain leftists, American leftists that have stumbled upon it and have sort of taken in its observations about America, like the kind of right at the pivot between, right before the end of the Cold War, at the end of the Reagan years, and at the start of Bush Senior. And, safe to say, a very challenging time for, socialism around the world, and a time where America seemed completely ascendant in almost every regard. So we thought, I decided, I saw somebody else talking about it maybe like a month ago and decided, what's up with this book? And so we have read it, and we're going to talk about it today.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, like there is this this like FT article. Yeah, it's just like how like prescient this book was. I don't know. Well, yeah, what did you make of it? Did you feel like I'm not sure if I felt the insights in this book were, while interesting and like in some cases amusing, I didn't necessarily feel that like the insights of this book were, maybe it's because like, I wasn't even like really like sentient at the time that this book was published. So I maybe I'm not appreciating sufficiently how underappreciated some of the things he points out were at the time. But it, like nothing like struck me as like, oh wow, like he really predicted that, that development,
Yeah, there were a few things I felt like less so. Like in a way, I came away from it thinking less than it was this kind of chilling, accurate prediction of like where America was going, and rather a pretty interesting, not always like 100% spot on, but a pretty incisive read of where America was at that point in its history. And particularly, he really brings this like dialectical frame to his assessment of America, which is that like, obviously there are these things about it that make it very strong, and then there are these things about it that kind of like undermine it and directly contradict there's a lot of things that are in tension, like he lays it out kind of in the preface of this is a country that's the richest country in the world, and yet I drive through like New York City and there's like street prostitutes and homeless people and like people on drugs and homeless people everywhere, which is like shocking. Like, how can these two things coexist? Like, this is and so he kind of goes from that approach, and I felt like his sort of investigation into like what elements of American society make it function like effectively, from coming from like a Chinese, granted this is the Deng Xiaoping era, so you could say revisionist reformist era, but still from
and like
Marxist
very explicitly
POV.
so, right? Because he makes a point to say that like we've been too dogmatic in our rejection of capitalism, and that has like resulted in our like inability to understand it. It just seems like he kind of connects like the the sort of like the mystery of capitalism, and that it is kind of surprising. Like that's part of what I think is so surprising, is that like it does seem like something that was like very like inscrutable to him in a way, or that like it is interesting that like there would have been like an audience for this, like this kind of analysis of American, this sort of observational analysis of American society, kind of like a de Tocqueville type of thing, or even like kind of reminds me a little bit of Said Qutb in some ways, actually. His
famous stay in the U.S. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, but he brings up de Tocqueville several times, and I feel like this very much is almost like a sort of a People's Republic of China, late 20th century sort of version of a similar thing that de Tocqueville did back in the 1830s, where he was one of the first people to really like travel around and try to get like a full sense of the culture, the economy, the culture, the politics of this country. and Wang is like pretty conscious that he's kind of doing something a little bit similar, and he even kind of critiques like he tries to place de Tocqueville's impressions in context of, like, for example, he says because of the lack of like a deeply rooted feudal aristocracy in the United States, and the fact of like there was one in France, around the time of de Tocqueville's life, that he was much more like impressed by the relative like liberties and freedoms that seem to be on display in America, and really kind of hyped it up as like, wow, like people have like town councils, and like they kind of, the education system is run, in this decentralized way, and blah blah blah, and you could look back today and kind of be like, oh, he's kind of blowing over the whole slavery thing, like, in terms of like how free this country is. But from his perspective, coming from Europe, where they still practiced slavery and had feudalism, you could see, like, relatively speaking, he's like, oh, this is kind of like progressive, but like, there are obviously limits to that, and I don't know, but coming from the People's Republic of China in the late 80s is like a pretty different context, and coming to America, the empire, is different than coming from 19th century France, and coming to the young American Republic. Like, this is a totally different relationship we're kind of talking about, because in some ways, China would be seen as, depending on your perspective, in the 20th century, would be seen as the more progressive country, right? Then certainly a lot of people in China kind of believed this as, this is further along that kind of arc, the arc of justice in history than American capitalism is. But they also have to, this is also at a time where they have to reckon with the apparent successes of American capitalism, and the fact that it outcompeted the Soviet Eastern Bloc. At this point in 1988, that seemed to be kind of like,
and also like China at this point was not the China of today by any means,
right?
Like, it was like really, like, it's like, a constant like point of reference for him is Japan, which at that time was like in the midst of the Japanese economic miracle, and that was another like kind of sort of insecurity that maybe hangs over this, or like a concern. It's like, how come like we aren't able to like compete on the level of like this other East Asian country? Obviously there's many factors, but, and of course, Japan, it's a sore spot for any patriotic Chinese man. But
but he does. It's funny the way he talks about the ascendancy of. He does like a comparative analysis of like what are the cultural factors that allow Japan to like outcompete and out innovate the United States, which itself is like fairly advanced. And he does like, actually, you almost could take out all the references to Japan, and if you put China and like updated it to 2025, like the same exact analysis would kind of. It would make sense. Like, it would check out. It's like the Japanese have a much more like collectivist like mindset about like business, and more, I mean, it's a little different in that they're loyal to corporations, but it's basically saying that like there are some cultural attributes that make the like a tightly kind of disciplined, organized, like super hierarchical kind of corporate structure more effective than in America, where individualism is so rampant. It's a theme he keeps like returning to, is the felt sense of the people that individualism is like the highest value, that like must be kind of like defended at all costs, and that leads to more difficulties in the kind of organization of people in society. Like, people aren't as content to just be like a loyal kind of cog in a bureaucracy, like a corporate bureaucracy, or they want to be inventors and stuff like that.
Right. And he talks about like the sort of sanctification of the future. Like, he calls it like futurism. Well, he doesn't. Okay, this is another important thing to clarify, is that there actually is, unless you found one, because I wasn't able to. I was like away this weekend, so like our coordination in the making of this episode was a little bit less close than usual. But so I was like looking it up yesterday on my flight, but. I couldn't find like an actual human translation of this book at all into English. I only found like ones that had been done by like various iterations of different AI language models.
Okay.
So I was forced to like rely on that. Did you find a one by a human?
No, that explains the mystery of the version that I found. It was like the only version I could find. I think it was labeled as Google Translate. Like that was like the
That may
publisher.
also be the case. Yeah.
Because there is, at first I was like, is this just kind of like a rough translation somebody did? Because there's kind of like some weird syntactical and like grammatical kind of like typos throughout it.
I found a relatively good one that I guess was done through ChatGPT 5.0. But
okay.
but again, like it's obviously like no person with like actual like knowledge of Chinese or of China did this. It's just like its language model, and there are like certain things that like I don't obviously like understand Mandarin. I can't read Chinese, so that's like a huge limitation. And
Right.
like I wish that I could like I couldn't I'm not even at the level where I could like look up the Chinese version and like figure out like what word corresponded to what what
Same here. Same
grammar,
here. It's
so
truly beyond me.
I don't know the first thing about it. So it it would take me like a day to figure out like something like that. But like
right.
the so that's like there, for instance, like there's a long section where he talks about the Amish, right? In Iowa, right? He talks about there's like an Amish community in Iowa, and in like the version that I have, it like somewhat humorously refers to them as Armenians, and I'm like, what? Like it's like this very weird thing where it's like one of the most interesting communities in America is the Armenians. These Armenians like choose to forego modern technology, and I'm like, what? Like
Not in Glendale,
and then
where
I kind
live.
of had to put it together that like oh, you're talking about like the Amish based on like where like he talks about like where they live and stuff, and like what part of Iowa.
Right. He's very fascinated by the
Kelowna.
Amish. Kind of in
exactly,
league with our recent episode. He is also just he's kind of spellbound by like their lifestyle and their rejection of modernity and how it's allowed, like it's tolerated. That's like a big clue for him as to like how America works. Is that the Amish are like allowed to completely fucking opt out of like all modern progress and like do their own thing, and people are kind of like, okay, yeah, sure. If you want to do that, fine. And, it's like the skeleton key for him.
It's essentially a great part. Like I'm just gonna read from this ChatGPT translation. This is a truly thought-provoking social phenomenon. In the heartland of modernity in the world, there's a group of people who refuse modernization. Their remoteness is not geographic but spiritual. They voluntarily isolate themselves from modernity. From this, we can draw a view. If people reject modernization in the spiritual realm, then modernization will find it hard to penetrate them. This phenomenon can be seen in different societies. The real driving force of modernization lies in people's inner worlds. Another issue worthy of deep reflection is, quote, psychological sense of security. This is in quotation marks again, like who knows if there's any rhyme or reason to the use of them. The Amish, again written here as Armenians, feel that this way of life provides the safest environment, and changing it would mean crisis and turmoil. This psychological fear is also an important reason they reject modernization. The process of modernization is naturally a process of transforming old social structures, and also a process in which a certain sense of security disappears. If people are all afraid of the loss of a secure environment, modernization or any social change will encounter immense resistance. When society coordinates these contradictions, the methods and means it adopts are to let things be, rather than force uniformity. It cannot force uniformity. If the government forces the Amish to accept modernization, it will only increase pressure on itself. Examples like the Amish are common in the United States. Many localities have their own ways of life that are out of step with the social mainstream, yet they can exist. Part of society's contradictions are resolved in this kind of turning a blind eye. No one is ashamed of the Amish's backwardness. Instead, it is seen as a typical reflection of the American spirit. Some methods of governance in American society are, in effect, non-management. Under certain conditions, this can be a relatively effective management method. On the way back, I saw an elderly husband and wife driving a cart along a modern highway. They were so at peace, so self-satisfied. Could modernization be wrong? Any choice of lifestyle comes with the conveniences it brings and the costs one pays for it.
No.
It's just like, I almost feel like in reading this, I felt I gained much more insight into like this guy and like his like worldview, and like it maybe as like somewhat representative, but we should be careful not to assume that this is like totally representative of like the Chinese view or whatever.
Right.
It was interesting, what stood out to him, and that he was like having this kind of revelation that something that like kind of is almost, taken for granted, like in like an American popular discourse, that like
Absolutely.
there is this sense that
If you try to
like with
directly
progress,
control
like
people.
that's kind of like the essence of like Burkean conservatism, in
Hmm.
the sort of not even just American, but like quote unquote Western tradition,
Yeah.
that like with progress, like sometimes there are costs,
Right.
and like
And
something can
his
be lost with these,
right.
advances. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he has his perspective is very interesting, and I think we should just state up front, like about Wang Huning, that part of the reason I think his work is being rediscovered, and I think there's a few other books that have yet to, like, maybe I think one, like the first English translation might be coming out, sometime in the near future, but like the reason people are very interested in him nowadays is because he's not just an academic, he's one of the most powerful political figures in China today. He is, just to read a little bit from his like Wikipedia here, after his academic sort of things in like the 80s, going abroad. Today, he is the chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, and has been a leading ideologist in the country since the 1980s. He has been a member of the CCP's Politburo Standing Committee, the highest decision-making body within the party, between convocations of the Central Committee of the National Congress since 2017. He was a professor of international politics and dean of the law school at Fudan University. During this time, he gained attention due to his belief in, quote, neo-authoritarianism, which held that a strong leadership was needed for China's stability and political reforms. He became a policy author for the CCP leadership in 1995 as a director of the research team at the CCP's Central Policy Research Office. He became the CPRO's deputy director in 98. And remained in the CPRO until 2020, the longest tenure in the office. As deputy director, he was instrumental in developing the Three Represents, a new ideological theory formulated under Jiang Zemin's leadership. He continued this work under Hu Jintao and is believed to have had an important role in developing the theories, scientific outlook on development, as well as harmonious society. He became a member of the CCP Secretariat in 2007, the central leading organ responsible for executing and implementing policy divisions, became a Politburo member in 2012, and is believed to have developed close relations with CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping, becoming one of his closer associates. So actually, Wang is credited with being like a major intellectual architect of what is now kind of called Xi Jinping thought, right? Like the era of like the last decade since she came into power, and you kind of saw, what Western sources often, even the label neo-authoritarianism. I'd like to know if he came up with that term, or if like Western think tanks like kind of slapped it on, like his philosophy. But it's this idea, this troubling idea of like China was moving closer to capitalism since the Deng Xiaoping era, but then she like brought down the dark iron curtain once again and started like doing more authoritarianism and blah blah blah. There's a lot of elements to that, obviously, but I think one thing that's shocking now is, in sharp contrast to 1988, China is the country, not Japan, not the United States, China, partially under the leadership of this man, and like the ideological
Yeah.
guidance of this man and his ideas, is booming and has become a legitimate like world superpower, both economically and increasingly militarily as well. And you have to look at like what my impression, based on like sort of Xi's tenure, is that they found a very specific way of implementing capital, like elements of capitalism within certain parameters, and then melding that with like muscular state directed investment in in like various sectors, in other sectors, and also fostering very intense capitalist competition within like the Chinese government might take a 50% stake in 10 different AI startups or something, and then make them like fiercely compete against each other in a somewhat like contained market. And then through that process, like one of them eventually will like innovate the hardest and then come up with a breakthrough technology. And you actually you do see this kind of bearing fruit in terms of like, they're what is it, DeepSeek? Is it DeepSeek or DeepMind? I always forget.
DeepSeek, there might be
one's Google, one's the Chinese one.
Yeah, Google is DeepMind, DeepSeek
Okay.
is the Chinese LLM.
Yeah, and there's new kind of LLM like innovations coming out that like use like 2% of the energy of like the OpenAI or the American ones, like kind of devastating innovations that like disrupt global markets. Or like the thing that's arguably holding up the U.S. economy right now is like Nvidia's stock price and all these AI companies, and then China's over here seemingly inventing like, yeah, we're just going to do an open source thing that like takes 2% of the energy and is like way more efficient. And like, sorry, all your investments are like worthless now. Like, in a way, they've found a way to like outcompete the United States at capitalism without becoming fully a capitalist society themselves. Like there's a hybrid thing. There's certainly a hybrid thing going on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of like, it reminds me of like what he says like in the book about the United States. Actually, it's very, very interesting to think of like the three represents and these things like in the context of this book, because like, he says in the book like that, on one hand, you could say like America is like the like the quintessential democracy. I'm paraphrasing, but like the quintessential democracy. On the other hand, you could say that it is not a democracy at all. And you really could say the same thing about like China and capitalism. Like, and on one hand, it's like one of the greatest forces in the global capitalist economy. And on the other hand, like,
probably.
yeah. And on the other hand, like, there's still like this notion that it's not capitalist, which is not just superficial. Like there is like, on again, like different people might have different concepts of what capitalism even means. But like they also like in terms of like theorizing what an alternative to capitalism is like through actual like implementation on a state level, like it is like kind of a China that would even like determine that. So it's like, again, yeah, it's interesting, and it is interesting like how I'm mindful of my limitations and like interpreting the book, as I said before, but like he representation is such a big theme like in this book, and like he spends so much time like contemplating the meaning of like the representation of the people in like American society, since this is such like a core idea like of like our like representative democracy,
right.
And I mean, again, I wish I kind of knew like what, if anything, was the like a lineage of the idea of the three represents, or like of like representationism politically in like Chinese political thought prior to his like advocacy of this, because it would have been after he wrote this, like it was in 1995 that he became like involved in directing the CPRO, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the three represents were rolled out. I think they were adopted in 2002, and they were first kind of introduced around 2000. And they were
and now
they were
they've
devised
been written into the CCP Constitution.
Yeah, they were devised by a small team, including Wang Huning, in around like 2000. Yeah, and so yeah, they are a part of. It's been described as like the newest
and in fact,
iteration.
into the Chinese Constitution itself. Now I'm realizing
it is. Yeah,
the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah,
it was officially described as the Marxism for contemporary China, and is officially a continuation and development of Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, and Deng Xiaoping theory. And there was significant, I guess, debate over it when it was being adopted. Jiang was accused by some of that basically these theories were not Marxist, but he argued that attaining the communist mode of production as formulated by earlier communists was more complex than had been realized. It was useless to try to force a change, as it had to develop naturally by following the economic laws of history. The theory is most notable for allowing capitalists, officially referred to as the new social strata, to join the party on the grounds that they engaged in, quote, honest labor and work, and through their labor contributed to building socialism with Chinese characteristics. And, some people classified the decision to allow capitalists in the CCP as political misconduct and ideological confusions. I guess the Chinese New Left movement was a faction that was like very against this. But I guess that is, yeah, they were not allowed into the Communist Party before that. They were obviously tolerated up to a point. And so I think it was this, delicate question of like, should we kind of try to like co-opt them and bring them in as partners? Like they can do capitalism as long as it's serving like the broader goals of like socialist development, or do we kind of push them out and be like, you're bad capitalists? Like,
I'm not sure if we actually dangerous. I'm not sure if we actually read out what the three represents are, but like just for this is from China.org.cn, so this I guess is /English. So I think that these are pretty close to official. So the three represents refers to what the Communist Party of China currently stands for. That is, it represents the development trends of advanced productive forces. It represents the orientations of an advanced culture. It represents the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of the people of China. So,
yes.
There you go.
Yes. The theory requires or like incorporate or like forces the incorporation into the CCP of those three concepts. Yeah.
Yeah, or like that's like it kind of like what, but I think that like the fact that it is like the three represents is meaningful. Like that the CCP like this is what
represents.
Like it's in the same way that like the U.S. government, for instance, like is supposed to. I think that these two ideas are the same. Like it represents the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of the people of China. That's the same thing as like in the US, but it also represents other things. It also like is standing for like, we need to like, the development trends of the advanced productive forces. It represents the orientation. So it's like, it's interesting.
That's
like
already
this is like kind
more...
of like what its mission is. Like it's not just to represent the people, but also to represent these kind of more abstract things, like the cultural and
that is very interesting because it these things seem so simple, and but on the other hand, like what are the three represents of the American like ruling class, an elite and their various kind of decentralized institutions of power? Like there aren't that specific of goals basically like ascribed. It's all a little more vague in America, of like, oh, we have to incorporate the development trend of America's advanced productive forces. We have to like represent the orientation of America's advanced culture, and we have to represent the fundamental interest of the overwhelming majority of the American people. The third one, everyone says they do the third one, right? But even that is debatable.
Yeah.
But the first two are like almost too specific for America.
Yeah.
Like the represents are kind of unspoken, and everyone kind of has a sense of what they are, which is like everyone should make the most money. Like we should all make money. Like kind of is like America should be rich and successful. And there should be allowances for people to become rich. Like I guess maybe this is like, kind of the American dream in a weird way, though it's never broken down into bullet points, is like maybe a rough equivalent to kind of this sort of a mission charter, that this points in a direction more than the American system points in a direction. And Wang brings that out a lot of the time about the looseness of like the American political system, which he partially sees as a strength, but also has like obvious limitations. Like, his breakdown of like what a party is in America, and he's like, it's not like what Chinese people or anybody else in the world thinks is a party. Like these are really loose, like weak organizations compared to like a communist, even like a European like Labor Party or Christian Democrat or something, like, or the Tories. Like our system is a little unique in that these are kind of like porous marketing vehicles that arise during election years and are kind of invite anybody to join them. And there's not even a real membership. You're just kind of like, you can register as one, but there's no like requirement if you're like a Democrat to like pay your dues to the Democrat Party, or whatever.
Yes.
And the only organizations that do have something like the DSA are like small and marginal. They're not the major parties are these big tent, like fluid organizations of like amalgamated interests and different groups of people like vying for power. And he sees that obviously as like a huge choke point that precludes that limits real democracy, but is also highly efficient because like he's like, if technically anybody in America could become president, but like that's not actually how it works. And it would probably be really chaotic if it did work that way. You know, you kind of have to have some kind of like
this is kind of an
mechanism.
interesting part. This is a section on pluralism or meritocracy. Maybe you remember this one. He writes, many people regard the United States as a pluralistic society and depict the American political system as pluralist. One of the earlier proponents of this argument was David Truman, who described the basic mechanisms of pluralist politics in his book, The Governmental Process. I don't even know if that's the real title, but another was Robert Dahl, who depicted the basic mechanism of contemporary American political processes in his book, Who Governs? I have translated Dahl's modern political analysis, and I'm fairly familiar with his ideas. Strictly speaking, his concept is polyarchy rather than pluralism. However, what conceptual differences there may be, their basic line of thought is the same. In American society, power is shared. There are many competing interests vying for power, none of which can monopolize authority, nor is any segment of the population completely excluded from power. Power is shared among different social groups through such mechanisms. Thus, pluralism must be based on interest group theory. The basic proposition of pluralism is that different social groups can all influence the operation of power. The question is whether this is possible. Scholars who advocate pluralism say it is. First, the United States is an immigrant country. Society is full of various racial, linguistic, and religious groups, and differences between industries remain pronounced. As Nesbitt said, the United States is a melting pot. Second, Americans have a propensity to form groups to pursue their own interests. That is indeed true. There are countless kinds of groups, and because the less government interference, the better is the preference. If people want certain things governed, they either organize themselves or organize to influence the government. The electoral system also promotes this mechanism. Americans' experience in elections is that once a certain number of people is reached, a certain amount of power can be constituted. Third, the government's decentralized structure also laid the groundwork for pluralism. The separation of powers prevents any single government branch from monopolizing authority, so power in the United States is contested by various competing forces. Different social interest groups share power through competition, negotiation, and compromise. The government acts as an arbiter and also has its own particular interests. Another school opposes the pluralist conception of politics, arguing that American society is an elitist democracy. Most people cannot be said to enjoy political power. Those able to compete are large, organized groups. Small groups are unlikely to have much influence. Large groups wield far more power than small ones. Moreover, those participating in groups do not encompass everyone in a given field. Groups have certain vested interests. In addition, the most powerful government does not merely take orders. It can exert its power forcefully, implement its policies, and achieve its aims. Those, who believe that America should be described this way, they believe that the masses, elected representatives, and interest groups all lack power. Power resides in the hands of a small power elite. Advocates of this view include Grant McConnell, who wrote Private Power in American Democracy, Theodore Lowy, this might be Levi.
I think it might be either Lowe or Rowe.
Yeah.
There's like a typo in mine around that name.
No, I guess there is an actual Theodore Lowy. Sorry, American political scientist. So this is him. Never heard of him before. I guess maybe he is a Levi, but his name is just spelled differently. Anyway. Theodore Lowy, The End of Liberalism, the Second Republic of the United States, which is, the actual title of his book in English. This is, I guess, I gotta very reluctantly give a little bit of credit to 5.0 here. I guess maybe these are in its training data, so it knows what books are being referred to.
Wow.
Wright Mills, The Power Elite, and Ralph Miliband, The State and Capitalist Society.
Yeah.
Mills was quite authoritative. He said that the power elite command the main hierarchies and organizations of modern society. They run the machinery of the state, lead military organizations, and occupy strategic command positions within the social structure. He argued that power in American society mainly comes from three sources: major corporations, the military, and political leaders. The U.S. economy is controlled by a few hundred large corporations that determine the course of the socioeconomic order. Political power is increasingly concentrated in the federal government, and presidential power has expanded. The military has become the government's largest and most complex expenditure and institution. The leaders in these three spheres form the power elite class and decide matters of life and death. The public can only watch power helplessly from the sidelines.
No.
So, he talks about Thomas Dye in his book, The Irony of Democracy. His main argument is that American society is governed by the talented elite. He says that from the founding of the country, the United States has been ruled by elites, and this continues to the present. The result of elite rule is the alienation of the masses, the exercise of power by a talented few, and social protests. This constitutes the dilemma of American politics. Democracy in principle means rule by the people, enjoyment by the people, ownership by the people, but the actual operation of politics is inevitably elite rule. By elite rule, he means power being held by a small group of people. Therefore, the authority to manage society ultimately rests in the hands of a portion of talented individuals. Whether that number is 5,000 or 50,000, they are definitely a minority of society. Elite rule is a common feature of societies under the capitalist system. This raises the question for the development of human societies. Does strict democracy conform to developmental laws or inherent requirements of large-scale human societies? Americans, on the one hand, theoretically uphold institutional democracy and constitutional democracy. On the other hand, psychologically and culturally worship talent. I wish I knew like what he meant by like talent. I feel like it's like charisma or something too, you know, or like sort of
or like outstanding
innate,
ability,
inherent power. Yeah, I don't know.
He relates it elsewhere to hero worship. He says that hero worship is like off the charts in American culture. That the exceptional individual is exalted to a degree that, you know, I've heard people say that before, even about in comparison to other countries, like say like Australia. They call it like the tall poppy syndrome. That like, oh, if you're like exceptionally talented, or you know, you want to go off and be famous, like you almost have to like move to America, because nobody likes it when like somebody, didn't we say in like Sweden there was that term which means like not thinking you're fucking better than anybody else, like kind of thing, you know?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's something that is not really in American culture. Like American culture loves people, that it's part of the Horatio Alger mythos of our culture, is that like technically anybody could become like a millionaire. Technically anybody could become president if you're like smart, or you're good enough at sports, or you're pretty enough, or you sing well enough, like, you know, you're great enough artist or whatever, like, you know, you kill it in business, like, and whatever it is, people love like worshiping people that succeed. Like almost regardless of like what they succeed at. I wonder if,
like, based on the way this word is being used in this book, again, like I'm not sure, but like, you know, I guess I should have downloaded the Chinese version so I could like search and see, like, you know, if it roughly corresponds to like the way I can find, because I could copy and paste. But yeah, I thought there would be like, you know, I didn't realize that I'd be like working from this machine translation for that reason. But I wonder, like, you know, there's this word tian fu, which like means like endowment, natural gift, like inherence, and I almost feel like there is like that is kind of like what the sense that the word talent as used in this book kind of has, like inherence, like it kind of like, you know, they worship people who, it's not like just about like how capable you are, but like they worship people who like are like have authority by their own, like, but you know, like a sui generis like kind of authority, you know, like they just
rizzed up individual,
exactly, like or charisma, that's like why I feel like it has a connotation almost of charisma. But he says few peoples worship talent as much as Americans do. Although many Americans may appear indifferent about many things, the psychology of hero worship in American culture is very strong. This may be related to the history and maturation of the American nation. This psychology and cultural value form the basis for the prevalence of elite rule in the United States. Americans conceptually advance mass democracy, but in practice accept elite rule. This is both a peculiar aspect of American social institutions and a difficult to discuss aspect. Many scholars recognize that the phenomenon of elite rule contradicts the principles of mass democracy, but it arises from mass democracy. Some people make use of it, and it cannot be forcibly abolished or limited. Doing so would instead undermine democratic principles. This dilemma may see a breakthrough in the future functioning of American social institutions, but which direction it will take is not yet predictable. You know, and he goes on to talk about participatory democracy versus, you know, representative democracy and stuff like that. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, it is kind of interesting, like, you know, in light of various things that we were just talking about, like about the, you know, the changes in China, and the idea like the three represents, like there's like kind of a different paradigms of like representation, like as he talks about with the sanctification, right? Like he says like people worshipped Oliver North because he was said, you know, to represent like the core of like the American
values.
Like values. Yeah, exactly. So it's like a different idea of like representationalism kind of. It's not about like the people actually having like power or like a stake in the government. It's actually like, the feeling that they are represented,
He's calling out the parasocial like rot at the heart of like the American project, kind of like wanting to live vicariously through a charismatic figure that is like put on the television or, is kind of exalted more than, you're right. It's very different from like representing the material interests of people. Instead of like, they represent an aspirational idea that they would want to like one day, attain, and therefore they become heroes that must be worshipped. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it is interesting, like because it's almost like kind of like a Weberian thing too, like like sort of charismatic authority. Like it does, like kind of like it's valuable to like consider that because that is definitely a dimension of politics, and it's one that like kind of it's. I mean, it is like definitely discussed like in some quarters and in some ways, but it's like in terms of like political theory, and I think often like when we're talking about like materialism, the idea that like there are certain people who have like this like a sort of inherency or endowment, like whether or not they actually do, it's kind of like there's like an sort of an imperative to like explain that. And explain like how that is. But it's interesting how he kind of treats it as like, I guess, he does offer sort of some like diagnoses of it or like what, why it is, but not like he kind of just takes it on its own terms in a way.
Yeah. And he minds some good insights from it, for sure. Yeah. There was a little part here in the preface I wanted to read because he does touch on kind of Marxist theory and how like one maybe should like apply to America like in the 1980s, and also the paradoxical nature of America, which inspires the title. He's kind of explaining it here, but I'll just read like a little bit from like page 5. He writes that let's see, the United States is generally considered to be a Western democracy, and a typical Western democracy at that, and Americans are proud of it. The Constitution, election campaigns, separation of powers, citizen participation in politics, and so on and so forth show one side of this system. But on the other side, can each commoner really dominate the politics of this country? My analysis in this book shows that the powerful groups that dominate politics are above the common people. The constraints of private property on political democracy in the capitalist system of the U.S. cannot be ignored. Even American scholars have said that a political democracy cannot function properly where the differences in economic power are so great that one group can use non-political means to determine the woes of another group. A true political democracy must therefore involve the right of the governed to control economic policy through their representatives. Economic decision-making in the United States is largely controlled by private consortia. Is this democratic? Is it undemocratic? I'm afraid it can't be answered in a single word. Paradoxes like these abound. It can be said that the United States is a rich country, but it can also be said that the United States is a country full of poor people. It can be said that the United States is a typical Western democracy, but it can also be said that the U.S. is a not-so-democratic country. It can be said the U.S. is a country with advanced education, but it can also be said the U.S. has a lot of education problems. It can be said the U.S. is a country where equality is paramount, but it can also be said that the U.S. is not so equal. It can be said the U.S. is stable. We can say the U.S. is a stable and developing society. Sorry, typo. But we can also say that it's a crisis-ridden society. My idea is to oppose the imaginary America with the factual America. The U.S. is only one capitalist country, and it does not represent all Western capitalist societies. I simply want to use the case study of the U.S. to promote our understanding of capitalism and, indirectly, socialism as well. 150 years ago, Marx and Engels declared in the Communist Manifesto, "With the development of big industry, the very basis on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates its products is itself dug out from under its feet. It produces, first of all, its own gravediggers." Lenin declared imperialism, quote, "dying and decaying at the beginning of this century." After all these years, it should be said that capitalism is still developing and cannot be underestimated. The judgments and analyses of historical materialism are correct in terms of historical development. However, the law of the development of human society, as indicated by historical materialism, needs the maturity of historical conditions. When these conditions are not ripe, any subjective judgment is rather inconsistent with the logic of historical materialism. For a long time, driven by the reinforcement of ideology, once there was a total rejection of capitalism, which was influenced by dogmatism, which prevented people from judging capitalist society objectively and scientifically, and the influence of, quote, left ideology, which took class struggle as the outline, which disturbed our perspective of the whole world and prevented people from learning from advanced experience of other countries. It also prevents people from learning from the repeated sentence. This not only hinders this, again, weird, but actually prevents people from correctly understanding and grasping the shortcomings of capitalism. As human societies, no matter what the system is, there will be conflicts and needs. It should be useful to understand what methods different human societies use to resolve contradictions, mitigate conflicts, and meet needs. If my analysis of these issues contributes to the development and progress of Chinese society, then I will have achieved my original intention. Yeah, and that's how he kicks off the book there. But interesting critique there also about like left dogmatism and the kind of like you could say like the eschatology that like capitalism is about to collapse. Like we just need to wait like 10 more years. Like the big one is coming. And like, you know, the tendency for the rate of profit to fall and blah, blah, blah. Like there was a little bit, I think, of a counterproductive dogmatic determinism, like historical determinism that sort of got like, you know, developed inside of historical
this is basically
materialism.
what Mao himself wrote about in like Opposed Book Worship, or whatever the Chinese title is, right? Where like the famous one that from which comes no investigation, no right to speak.
Great line,
you know, like very, very applicable to many different scenarios. But like, you know, the point of that like writing was that like, well, you know, there was like this sort of almost like Marxist Salafism, where like there was like an overcommitment to like the letter of like, you know, I guess his point was that like Marxist theory had been proven right in the Chinese situation because it had been proven right. It wasn't right by virtue of its own self, just because it was, you know, what Marx had said. Like it was shown to be applicable in like, you know, in certain ways, and like in other ways, like it might, you know, not be. I guess like it maybe is like the sort of the takeaway. And I think that is kind of an important thing, you know, like there's some books that, you know, like you can have a religious reference for, like the Quran, but other books, you know, like the theory of Marx never meant to be treated in that way. I mean,
certainly not.
Some people religiously treat the Quran in a way that perhaps it wasn't meant to be treated either. But I think that the way that there, and that's definitely is a phenomenon that you can see like on the American left too, where like rather than ever say that Marx might have been wrong about something, or that even that what he said may not quite apply to the contemporary situation because of like the changing circumstances, there's always this kind of effort to in some way make what he said into something different, you know, so that he can continue to be right.
It's a losing game to be like he was vindicated 100% of the time, like on all fronts, like, and then you basically have to do like scriptural gymnastics to go and like try to squeeze.
It's a very strange phenomenon too, because like I almost understand why, like, you know, if your religious text, for instance, says like the world is flat, you know, which is not something that like the Quran says, you know, to the like even though some
or Marx's writings,
believe that, right, but you know, then I understand why you would like maybe want to believe it, like you find some way to say the world was flat, or find some way to say the religious text doesn't actually say that, you know, but like I feel like it's been part of like the very idea of his theory that like this theory like could, you know, that thought could continue, this theory can evolve, and that like, you know, things in changing circumstances, like what is, you know, the right course, or, you know, what the proper analysis, that also may change. But for whatever
Absolutely.
reason, there is this, I think, if I were to channel Wang Huning, like I think his analysis would be that there is like this sort of like just instinctual inclination towards this, whether it's exclusive to American society or not. I haven't like, thoroughly observed like the behavior of left wingers in other countries, but or outside the Anglophone world, but like it seems like somewhat broader. But certainly it is a thing. And it is interesting like what he has to say about the sort of American left in some ways.
Oh, the
Right?
small
Yeah.
chapter on encountering like radical, quote unquote, radical groups was like pretty funny because I think he
Yeah.
stumbles across, I think it was on like page 158. Let me see if I can
Yeah,
bring it up.
radical organizations. Yeah, exactly.
He does, there is a predictive line in there that I thought was like, okay, I'll give him credit for that one, where he says, I mean, his read on the state of the American left in the late 1980s is like pretty brutal, but
Yeah.
I would have to say like
Yeah.
accurate. You just like it's pretty spot on. Because he talks about how he comes across a newsstand selling The Militant, which turns out to be a Socialist Workers' Party newspaper, and starts
Yeah.
talking to the
And
girl
yeah,
who's like
yeah.
running the
This is another
stand.
funny translation because it consistently refers to her in my version as the newsy girl
The
because it was
newsy-
like some girl handing out like some socialist newsletter, I guess, which was called The Militant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Mister, buy paper. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It talks about, it is kind of funny. He says that, there was not many people were patronizing this book stall. She was selling books including the Communist Manifesto, a collection of Castro's speeches, and a collection of Trotsky's speeches. It was easy to see that she belonged to a leftist radical organization. It is said there are hundreds of such small organizations or micro-organizations in the U.S. They are active, but have little political influence, and most of the population does not care about them. The girl was also selling the organization's newspaper, The Militant, and he says that like the big article of this was about a guy named Mark Curtis who was a member of the SWP and was accused of sexual assault, and they were like fighting about how like he didn't actually commit the sexual assault. So like ain't nothing new, I guess, in leftist orgs with sex pest scandals happening. When it goes on to like, oh, the political, articles, blah blah blah. This line I thought was pretty funny. The girl who sewed newspapers once said that Cuba was the only socialist country left in the world, I'm afraid. I think he's referring to, they don't think China is socialist anymore. So he's
Yeah.
like, oh, she told me that Cuba's the only socialist country left. This is when the USSR still existed too. So, and like the whole Eastern Bloc. So like I think he's casting a side eye at Trotskyism a little bit there. And let's see. Yeah, he goes on, blah, 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 like talks about let's socialist, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he says here that this is his
he talks
assessment
about
of the popularity, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, but this is also a good part here when he talks about like the article in the
Right.
magazine was called "One Caribbean, One Destiny,"
Right.
a conference that was held in New York that discussed prospects for the anti-imperialist struggle. It was organized by the Caribbean Unity Alliance, which is made up of 38 political organizations from 23 countries. Their main speaker was a former prime minister of Grenada's press secretary. His remarks are worth reading. He said, "What we want to discuss is using our alliance against their alliance. Our alliance refers to workers, peasants, fishermen, youth, students, and the suffering. Their alliance refers to those with power, privilege, capital, and wealth. In today," and then he comes, the other one back in. "In today's world, there are many who still speak like this."
Yeah, my version says still many who speak such words.
Yeah.
Either way, he's being a little, he's being
Yeah.
it's funny that he's like, oh, this Heckin international, like, like
It seems kind of like cringe to him because
Yeah.
like he feels like it's gotten them like nowhere, basically.
Right.
That's like his perspective,
I guess so. Yeah, this kind of like the confidence and the insistence, like this feels outdated to him, and it probably doesn't help that all of these people think like China sucks and like is sus, and they think they kind of whatever. Even though, let me see, he says. Yeah. Okay, so at the end he says, like, as you can see from the above reports, this is a radical group, and there are countless such radical groups in the U.S. and other Western societies, but most of them have little impact. Some of the issues that these organizations talk about are true, and some of their ideas are not unhelpful to social progress. The status of these self-proclaimed socialist organizations is particularly low in the United States. I am afraid that these phenomena cannot be seen in the context of the programs and activities of these organizations, but in fact reflect the relationship between the two major ideologies in the world today. Since the post-war socialist countries have encountered twists and turns of one kind or another, their economic development has lagged far behind that of the capitalist countries, so their overall appeal is not sufficient. The economic development of the capitalist countries, on the other hand, has produced an overwhelming appeal. Generally speaking, the public does not judge the merits of society from the point of view of institutions, structures, ideas, spirituality, human nature, etc., but from their own daily life, or from the gut, not from the brain. Because of the huge gap in economic and social development, organizations and ideas that advocate reforming the capitalist system will have no great impact in Western society. Therefore, American society also leaves them to their own devices. If one day...
My version says American society lets them live or die on their own. Yeah.
Just lets them spin out in their own corner.
Yeah.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.